What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Knipe here with Always
Typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're doing the 1981 Canadian Winter Classic, Ghostkeeper. That's me in the deep snow.
That is my favorite part of this. And Chris was joking about supercuts that exist for Until Dawn that show people slipping and falling over and over. And I'd love to see a supercut of them trudging through the snow in this because it makes me laugh every single time.
They really don't shy away from how challenging it would actually be to trudge through knee-deep and, in some cases, waist-deep snow in the beautiful mountains of Alberta, Canada.
And they are beautiful from what I hear. I have not traveled much in my time, and I've not traveled much in Canada. Luckily, Chris did go to Banff, so right before us watching this, really. So I had an idea of just how goddamn beautiful it is. And you know what? This movie helps. If you've never been to Banff, or if you've never been to Canada, because a lot of our listeners aren't here in our home country, and you want an idea of just how gloriously shitty this tundra can really be, and how unbelievably awe-inspiring beautiful it can be, there's some really amazing shots in this.
Yeah, and if you are the type of person that loves a winter wonderland, well, we got you covered, up to and including here in Ottawa, because we just got dumped, 35 centimeters of snow in 48 hours or something. And previously, we were pretty green around here, cold, damp, but green. And then all of a sudden, here's all that snow you ordered.
I wonder if there's a Nana Bush story about that. I was looking up Nana Bush stories, specifically for Nana Bush and the Wendigo, and I think it's so much more Algonquin or many other tribes here have Nana Bush stories, and Nana Bush goes by many names. He's a trickster spirit, very much the Loki of Aboriginal lore here, and Indigenous peoples have many stories about Nana Bush, but as little white kids in school, thanks to the National Film Board, we did get, and there's books about Nana Bush, The Adventures of Nana Bush, and there's some of him with the Wendigo, which are amazing and hilarious, and have to do with the Wendigo like standing in a prone position to show his rosy buttocks or something. Like, it's just hilarious. But I'll bet you that our weird, like, February thaw, January thaw, let alone our warm breezes right before we get a lot of snow dumped on us, are related to a Nana Bush story too.
You actually reminded me of those old Nana Bush stories that I completely had forgotten about. They were a little before my time, but a quick Google search after you were talking about them, and it was a flood of memories. That is kind of the mandate of the Dead Air podcast. This was originally, gang, supposed to be a show, and even before it was a show, it was the website on splatterpictures.net, and the whole point of it was for me to dig deep, to, as I think I put it back then, come with me as I explore my interest in horror films, or some sort of trite ass nonsense like that. But I always wanted to find the weirdest, most obscure films that were worth your time. And it always comes from this idea where everyone is looking right, I want to look left. And this has become sort of muscle memory for me, because it's like I am constantly looking to see weird ass films, and it can become very interesting to me when on more than one occasion I find myself talking about or doing videos or somehow acknowledging a horror film that has yet to have its moment where it's discovered cold and shivering in a closet somewhere, and then the rest of the world decides to look at it. And it seems right on schedule when I start talking about Ghostkeeper and I make a TikTok video about Ghostkeeper, then what happens? Everyone seems to be talking about Ghostkeeper.
It's almost like the curse of last podcast on the left. Whenever they mention someone, they die. When you mention something, it gets popularized by vinegar syndrome. And that's not a bad thing. It's much better than people dying, I will say. But yeah, this one too, it's odd because I looked it up in the Canadian horror film Terror of the Soul textbook that I have here, because it's like the only one I could afford as far as horror academia goes. And they make a mention of it as if people had watched it. I mean, I'd never heard of it. Not that I'm some sort of horror, Canadian horror guru at that. But it's weird that it seems to be on the tip of the tongue everywhere we look now.
Really, people are talking about it. Obviously, a Canadian redistribution company that was responsible for cleaning this film up and releasing it, and they're doing it through Vinegar Syndrome. And then when that happens, people just sort of cropping up, oh my God, I love Ghostkeeper. Here's my VHS copy of it. And this thing sells out in a matter of days. I got the very last copy myself because previously, and gang, this is one of those films where it is not the easiest thing to track down. Hard copies of this movie are prohibitively expensive. It is, we're talking upwards of almost $200 to go and get this on Blu-ray. The previous Blu-ray that was done, Code Red, I believe, was the people that put it out. So now Vinegar Syndrome has it out, and it's probably going to be a very beautiful copy. And I suspect now that Vinegar Syndrome has its claws in it, that it will get released to Tubi and Shudder and the streaming services in a far more elevated quality than what was previously available. But this is weird. This is extremely obscure. And I only heard about it because I looked at the spine of somebody's DVD collection and I saw this in the background. And just, again, always searching, always looking. What's that? Ghostkeeper. And you Google it and you look at the cover and it looks cool. You find out it's a Wendigo story. 1981, a Wendigo movie? That's interesting. I didn't know that existed. And you fall down this rabbit hole of it's Canadian. Hey, I'm Canadian. It's a tax shelter film. But again, as you had pointed out before we started recording, true flash in the pan, here and gone.
Yeah, a real tax shelter gem. The sort of thing that we might have had mention of it because like I said it's mentioned in the Canadian horror film as if other people have watched it. It's mentioned probably in any can exploitation articles we would have read in Rue Morgue or in other compendiums of Canadian horror film or weird little horror gems. If we had read more of those Ken exploitation books closely, we might have noticed this title before and had the same sort of like, hey, what's Ghostkeeper? Or positing that perhaps it had a hidden fandom because of people looking up Ray Bradbury Theater, where a lot of these people in this film, and it's a very tiny cast, and that's part of what helps keep it spread small, I think, is because it's got such a small cast by a distribution company that shelved it and a production company that made nothing else. But a lot of the people that worked on it worked on Ray Bradbury Theater, so maybe people being like, I wonder what else they were in. Oh, here's this movie Ghostkeeper. But they weren't the horror academics that we read, or they weren't horror influencers, let's say. They weren't the gurus of horror film, so it just remained shelved and remained secret. We might have read a mention of it as if we'd watched it and just passed it by, and it didn't stand out like that spine on the shelf in a video did to you. And it's a shame, because this is kind of like the Canadian picnic at Hanging Rock in a way. It's got the same sort of feel to me. It's got the same sort of cinematography. It does, of course, fall short because it's a tax shelter horror film by people who had no real business making a horror film, if I may put it bluntly. But, you know, it's got a lot of these things that we need in a horror slasher. And it's got that quintessential Canadian beginning. It starts out by mentioning that it's a Wendigo film, and it has haunting flute music and a gorgeous shot of the Rockies. Like, it is just, it starts out in that first minute as the most important Canadian horror film ever.
God, I'm so glad that you mentioned the flute music. Oh, doesn't it just feel like you are watching some kind of 70s Canadian special? You're about to learn about the titmouse or something.
Yeah, and it does have some parallels, like, to the kind of documentary filmmaking that was going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to say, speaking of Rue Morgue magazine, Yasmina Katita did a whole essay for their release for Ghostkeeper. Someone who works heavily with Rue Morgue magazine and is kind of the obscure VHS horror final boss, as far as I'm concerned. Every time that person is posting about something online or through Rue Morgue, it's like, forget it came from Bowen's basement. It's like it came from Bowen's sub basement. So they're extremely knowledgeable, and of course knew all about this film probably before any of us. But that documentary style that you were mentioning is so apropos. And before we go too much further, I want to get a little bit boring, because we've said Canadian tax shelter film a couple of times, and it's important for our listeners around the world, and perhaps Canadian listeners who don't remember this, but there was a period in between 1974 and 1982 in which the Canadian government decided to give a 100% tax rebate on productions that were certified Canadian. There was a bunch of things that needed to happen in order to get your film qualified as certified Canadian. It was basically just a bunch of numbered rules that you needed to follow, almost like Canadian content. It would be like if the CRTC breathing down your neck to make sure you're playing a certain percentage of stuff from Canada. But it's important to know that, because the reason why films like this got made and why there was a humongous boom of horror and exploitation, low budget comedies, all kinds of stuff coming out of Canada between the mid to late 70s and very early 1980s was because of these tax exempts. It was essentially a scheme, like
Yeah.
where if you made a certain amount of money, you could invest in a film. So if you made $100,000 a year and you took $20,000 that you had made and you invested it into making a horror movie, something like this, then all of a sudden you are no longer in the tax bracket. So you end up potentially saving tens of thousands of dollars because you're in a lower tax bracket. And now also the movie could, often didn't, but could make a profit, and then you would get even more money back. So that was the golden goose that they were dangling in front of wealthy Canadians. And so I'm not surprised that this just starred a bunch of one and done actors. I'm not surprised that this production company sprung out of the snowbanks themselves and then disappeared into complete obscurity after it was done, because this was so common. And yes, for every one of the Ghostkeepers that was released that completely vanishes entirely from the public consciousness. There's also My Bloody Valentine and April Fool's Day and Happy Birthday to Me. Tons of slashers and other exploitation films that become part of the horror zeitgeist.
I think that the ratio is backwards in that for every Cronenberg, there's 10 Ghostkeepers, because there's probably a million of these films that we never saw the light of day, and it's just fantastic that this exists. Now, there's a few caveats to this film going into it. Like if you're looking for it on YouTube, like I did, because that's where Wes had stumbled upon it first too. It's not there anymore. We're waiting with bated breath for Shudder to put it out, but in the meantime, we found it on a small little ad-supported free streamer called Plex. If you're looking for it, you may be able to find it there. You may be able to find it on American Tubi or with a VPN if you're lucky. Otherwise, you're paying a lot of money, fighting for a steelbook, or waiting like we all are, or stumbling upon a VHS somewhere, because they do exist. It was really in that area between completely lost film, which there's lots of those that were made in the 80s here in Canada, and something like Curtains, which, whether it had a re-release or not, it would have been available because it was in every mom and pop rental place. It was in every Blockbuster. Curtains was everywhere. So it's not as maybe it's not as deserving of the praise and the popularity that Curtains got. Not to say that Curtains is the most popular film in the world, but it's so much more accessible, easier to find. I had put off seeing Curtains and heard about it for years and years and years. I've read articles about Curtains. I had seen scenes from Curtains before watching it. So I knew very well of Curtains. This I've heard no mention of. And there could be, like I said, caveats, two real reasons. One, the condition of it is not awesome, but I love it. So when you're watching this film, you'll see a lot of dust and scratches, the cigarette burns. The sound is a little bit uneven, which helps that warbly flute music, if you ask me. The waterphone and flute combo in a horror film is just, no, man, you can't get better than that. So it is, it's rough. You can tell this is a old 80s film thing. And the first time I was watching it, it looks almost like they've put a filter on it to make it look old, but in your heart it's not, and it just helps, right? It's so lovely that way. And the other thing that could be a hindrance is that we've tossed around the word Wendigo here. And I'm sorry to get you excited if you're a Wendigo fan like we are. It's the Wendigo mythology used in this is made up. I'm going to read just a small section and then a larger section from the Canadian horror film. This is from Monsters Up North by Callum Vansdal. And he mentions this in one little paragraph at the beginning of the book. Other monsters of Indigenous myth have appeared on Canadian movie screens, but just as a Sasquatch, only with a peculiar infrequency and half-heartedness of execution. I'll pause there to say, not so much anymore. We have a lot more Wendigo films from when this essay was written. There is perhaps a reluctance on the part of white filmmakers to extend the plunder of Aboriginal nations from merely their lands and livelihoods to their myths. I'll pause there again to say, yes, because they're story keepers, and that's who tells Aboriginal stories. We don't. To continue. Ghostkeeper, an Alberta-made picture from 1981, is a minor exception, presenting a distinctly appropriated version of the Wendigo story, but giving the audience little of the legend's rich backstory and capitalizing on none of its horrific potential. Okay, very true. It does capitalize on none of its horrific potential. It is a completely fictionalized idea of a Wendigo that we're dealing with here. Spoiler alert, right? It is a Wendigo story at its heart in a way, sort of, but the linchpin of the story is completely fabricated. So I'll skip forward in the book a little bit to read from Blood in the Bush Garden by Alia Ahmad, an Ottawa academic here. really wonderful person, I might add. And she goes on to say the Wendigo and indigenous folklore in general has long been mined in order to create particular types of quasi magical representation infused with the sensibility that Terry Goldie, another academic and author, names indigenization, or the impossible necessity of becoming indigenous. Goldie describes the psychological dynamic of indigenization as founded on the settler's gaze, perpetually trying to solve a riddle of occupation. The white Canadian looks at the Indian. The Indian is other and therefore alien, but the Indian is indigenous and therefore cannot be alien, so the Canadian, meaning Wes and I, must be alien. But how can the Canadian be alien within Canada? This is posited by Goldie. Goldie's concept is helpful for understanding horror narratives that are already heavily bound up in the implications of the gaze. I'll pause there to say you've obviously, definitely, probably heard of the female gaze, male gaze, and how many films are coded through the male gaze. So
Yes, of
that's what they
course.
mean by
Carol
gaze.
Clover's book, of course, talks about that at length.
And we've tossed those terms around just as, armchair enthusiasts of the academic train of thought,
Yeah,
talking about the
absolutely.
different lenses from which horror is viewed in. So, in When the Woman Looks, for example, Linda Williams describes the woman's terrified look and the horrible body of the monster as containing also a germ of possible kinship. I'll pause there. I sat on really cool talks that Alia Ahmed gave on the monstrous feminine, which really gets into all of that, the kinship between the monster and the female and a surprising affinity between the monster and the woman, and the sense in which her look at the monster recognizes their similar status within patriarchal structures of seeing, whereas the indigenizing gaze seeks affinity. The subject of horror finds it frequently in the monstrously rendered landscape of the Canadian wilderness. And man, I just that summed it up a lot. The scary thing in this film, and the thing that's beautiful in this film, and the thing that I really wish we hadn't lost when we kind of nearly lost this film, I'd say, is that it is the wilderness. Mountains are made for living, is a quote from this film. And it seems kind of trite, kind of a throwaway line, but man, it is this movie could have been so much more if taken more seriously. And if you sit back and watch it 4 or 5 times like I have recently, it becomes so much more important.
I'm really glad that you read those excerpts from the. I got to get myself a copy of that book. I really do. Like, it's such a valuable bit of academia. The only book that I was going to bring to the table for this had absolutely nothing to do with Ghostkeeper, but again, going into the thing that we've been talking about a little bit about films having their moments, and that was Fangoria magazine's 101 horror films that you have definitely not seen, and you go through those films that they, and this book was published in 2003, and it's
Mhm.
so interesting, the films that they recommend, that I sometimes you I read these films and I have to laugh, because one example is like Event Horizon or The Exorcist 3. I don't think I've ever logged on a day of the internet where someone's like, let's talk about this super underrated and underseen and no one's heard of it movie, The Exorcist 3. Here's my hot take. I think it's better than the first one. Like, it's you
Stuff that is on the TV. If you turn it on right now, you'll stumble upon one of
precisely
those 2 films.
precisely the
Yeah.
jump scare with the scissors. Here's my hot take. It's one of the most overrated like praise of a jump scare I've ever heard in my entire life. But going back to what you were saying about this lens of like how this film is summed up, and how these people are isolated by this environment, and it really just becomes this story about these two women at two different very stages of their life, and that in itself is so fascinating and so compelling to have this dynamic between these characters in something that I also agree with you in thinking that is, we narrowly escaped this being lost media.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and unless this was printed the way that it is now, by the time those VHSs degraded and those Blu-rays fell into complete obscurity, how do we have access to this film unless you have a lot of money? You don't. And all of that to say that these amazing themes, if you went to this film for a Wendigo movie, the way that you're imagining in your head right now, dear listeners, you will be mad.
Yeah, I agree. We also narrowly escaped missing this for its timeliness in a few ways, having mentioned that Chris went to Banff recently, so I have a better idea of how it is there right now. And having my recently watching Yellow Jackets, which takes place in a place very similar to this, which is hilarious. I'm just waiting for the Wendigo to show up there. And the fact that it is a New Year's Eve picture. We meant to do this for New Year's Eve. We're a little behind. Everyone's a little behind these days. I find since the big pandemic, everyone's been lazy and maybe selfish in some ways, but we've had a lot of setbacks and hiatuses and just we had to take a break. We're getting back into the swing of things though. So happy New Year's. Happy New Year's, everyone. This is our New Year's episode.
This is our New Year's episode. We have entered 2026, like a lot of you, screaming and crying and vulnerable, and between getting over illnesses and just other stuff going on in life. Unfortunately we weren't able to get this to you in a timely manner, but at the very least we're still filming this in January, and it's particularly wintry, so I think that this is appropriate. But fuck all that, Lids. Fuck it all to hell. It's the year 2026, and I have not yet once asked you, what is this movie even about anyways? And you can't say Wendigo.
No, it's really not about Wendigo. And I think that's what made me want to read all the Nanabush stories, because there's a few Nanabush. Nanabush danced around the Wendigo to melt its cold heart, But yeah, this movie is really about not going where you're not wanted. I know I've said this about other films before, but they usually have to do with the Idol, the Canadian Idol, like the Idol Wilderness, or something like Pristine, where they're going into, the bosom of nature itself to rediscover something about it or themselves. But here it is a bleak, frozen, gross tundra that they are trudging through the snow, going like it's not that Canadian Idol, but they still somehow go somewhere where they're not welcome. The whole walking into somewhere, whether it be for shelter or just a howdy do, you shouldn't just be trespassing into other people's homes, abandoned hotels, or what have you, because you're now obviously in a horror film.
And also, you need to have a nice attitude about you. You can't be coming in there with your sly jackass comments. This film centers around Jenny, Marty, and Chrissy. And aside from Jenny, who will spend a good majority of the movie zoning out and looking haunted by just about every little thing, it's going to start off with, we're going through the snowy wilderness on skidoos, and we're going to end up in a snowy general store where Marty is going to, God damn it. It sounds like Marty as a character sounds like Sam Raimi, or more accurately, sounds like Bruce Campbell's impression of Sam Raimi, where he's like, yeah, what's going on here? It's really hysterical. I do like the exchange, the authenticity. One of the things that we're going to be mentioning over and over again is this entire thing was shot in Lake Louise, Banff, Alberta, Canada. These were functioning stores. Deer Lodge was a functioning vacation spot, only made to look abandoned and decrepit. And so this air of cozy authenticity, the the thud of your boots on the wood with the winter outside. I just feel like I'm exploring Upper Canada Village, or I'm down at McSkimming Farm or some other super niche Ottawa specific thing. Sorry, I'm narrow casting to our very local Canadian listeners, but there's something just so immensely cozy, but yet frozen and foreboding about this. And I think the fluttering flute music does contribute a lot to that to me as well.
Big time. And it probably is what takes me back to things like Picnic at Hanging Rock, which is so much more beautiful. They had so much more money behind them, though, right? And it's so much more approachable, perhaps, because it has to do with affluent people in affluent environs, which there was a lot more movies about that. There weren't a lot of movies about, Richie Rich going up with his girlfriend, plural, to the Canadian Rockies, which, is a thing sort of like in film at the time. These locations, much like in the film Rituals, which we talked about, they're all these very well off engineers and lawyers and doctors that can afford to fly in fishing and go on a little bit of an expedition, so to speak. And it's the same thing here, but done in a younger person's point of view, where these are, 20 somethings people going for a vacation to hang out with a bunch of engineers and doctors, very well off people, which is the way it used to be here. Now, you and I can afford to go to Banff and have a little weekend getaway. We can go to Deer Lodge, or we can go to, next door here in Quebec. We can go to some beautiful chalets. At the time, this was completely unaffordable to the layman, to the white collar or blue collar worker. You had to be higher echelon white collar, whereas you were professors, doctors, lawyers, that sort of thing. That's who went to these places. And there aren't a lot of horror movies that deal with those sorts of people at the time, because slashers were teenagers in the backs of vans doing Scooby-Doo bullshit, where this is sort of like a departure from that in so many ways. I like that it reminds me of Picnic at Hanging Rock and Let's Scare Jessica to Death at the same time.
Man, speaking of a movie that had gotten a little moment, I think it was mentioned in some kind of documentary. I don't know if it was In Search of Darkness or if it was underrated horror films or best scares or something, but Let's Scare Jessica to Death got a boost, I want to say, within the last like 4 or 5 years, where I felt like a lot of people online were talking about it. And another movie that's mentioned in that Fangoria 100 horror movie things, where it's just it's nice. I always like it when these films have their moment of modern appreciation. This film, speaking of slashers, was directed and written by James Makachuk, and also written by Doug McLeod. He pitched in on the scripts, but the original genesis of this was to take something like John Carpenter's Halloween and have a very small cast in a very isolated area, and let's see how we can do that, because it keeps costs low and it makes filming things relatively simple. So even though this is not a slasher per se, although it has a lot of slasher elements in it, much like a lot of films coming out in this era, it all goes back to 1978. And this film was been made not too long after Halloween was released and made all kinds of money, and people could see the potential of that, including investors that were interested in not only getting a tax break, but getting a profit. But this film in particular, these 20 somethings, Marty, Jenny, who are a couple, and then Chrissy, who kind of shows up on her skidoo like 5 minutes later, and they all, what I love about this, they're constantly talking about people and situations and things that we never see. So they are,
everyone at the lodge is so boring.
oh my God. And it's this party, it's this New Year's party, and everyone there is partying and drinking and doing other stuff. But yet they're all such a bunch of dullards. And Chrissy apparently went there with a boyfriend whom they we will never even know his name or where he is or what happened to him. But again, and I make this reference a lot in other films, but it is like a play where you're just told about things, but they have nothing to actually show you. There's no big group party scene where everyone's like, "Hey, let's get on the skidoos and go exploring. I think I heard that there's an old abandoned." None of that. Absolutely none of that. We're starting off with these characters just exploring the wilderness and being told by the wise old shopkeeper, you don't want to go messing around in some old house, or he doesn't say that, but he doesn't want them to go exploring too far because it's not safe, and they're best to just go back. Marty, arrogant Marty, he is not concerned whatsoever. They can handle themselves, and they do for a while, and we're going to get so many wilderness shots as they make their way up to Old Deer Lodge.
This is the first of our trudging through the snow sequences, which I absolutely love, if I haven't already mentioned. I mean, what says horror filmmaking like 10 fucking minutes of people trudging through the snow in their matching snowsuits? Well, they don't have matching snowsuits, but they're wonderful snowsuits. They have matching skidoos, though. A great Canadian company, Bombardier, is famous for skidoos, and they have matching helmets. So I think that all of this stuff was just borrowed from Deer Lodge, quite honestly. You can still go to Deer Lodge today. It's closed right now because of a fire at their sister hotel. But eventually, I'd like to make my way through the fucking snow to get there. They have a skidoo mishap, which is quite normal. That's why I don't really like skidoos, not just because they're noisy, but I can hear them and smell them just thinking of them. I do like their utilitarian purpose, but if you don't know anything about taking care of skidoos, you maybe shouldn't go too far in one because they are, and were at the time, prone to breaking down in the middle of fucking nowhere or tipping you off of them. These three do seem to be able to handle themselves fairly well, but they don't know any of the mechanics behind making sure a skidoo keeps running. They kind of get stranded and then go traipsing off into this abandoned hotel. I don't think they refer to it by name, but the name is emblazoned on the side of it. We see in a later shot that it's quite obviously Deer Lodge, but the the Overlook Hotel, it is not. It is quite
No,
rustic.
very
Yes.
rustic.
It's big though. And when they go in there, they do their little round of hellos and then they make some fun about, let's check in and get some wine happening here. Maybe this place has a wine cellar. But it seems like abandoned for years.
Yeah, and by just looking at the ledger, you can see that there hasn't been a guest in 5 years. I think that that's a good number because obviously this was still a functioning lodge, and so you couldn't make it so decrepit because then you would have to clean everything all up. So there's just kind of a layer of dust, a layer of dishevelment, but it's not like the place has been trashed whatsoever. And what do you want to say about Marty? There's so many moments in which Marty is just vaguely and sometimes not so vaguely hitting on Chrissy. And it really makes you, and then it cuts to like these long shots of Jenny just not saying anything, staring at them. And there's definitely a moment of confusion where I'm thinking to myself, is Marty and Jenny even together? What is the relationship? Because him and Chrissy are so openly flirtatious and the interactions are so weird. But then I suppose it just kind of comes off as Marty being this kind of Lothario, just this rich, flirtatious himbo.
A himbo is exactly it, and I think that the origin of that term, took place at this time because he lives it, man. I think that it's Three's Company, the adult-rated version, where Jack actually was able to be a himbo like he wanted to be, right? And didn't have to live under the guise that he was gay. That's exactly what's going on here. We later on get a little bit of backstory into Jenny and Marty's relationship, in that they do have an open relationship to a certain extent. But it's not apparent at first. We immediately dislike Marty as a result. I guess most of us immediately dislike Marty as a result. There's something in these 80s and 70s, kind of jokester, 20-something man characters that I really dislike, because they are always super tryhards. But it's also his affluence that shines through. He has affluenza to the nth degree. He doesn't have a much to exercise it with here, given the environs, because he is an asshole to the shopkeeper who's nice to him in return. Go figure. He's shitty to these fucking girls. And he has this air of, okay, it's safari time, girls, is one of the lines. And it's like, man, who the hell goes on safaris, right? But these entitled rich assholes, which he is. Luckily, he doesn't have a lot of time or latitude to be the most entitled rich asshole, because he's in the middle of fucking nowhere with nothing but his shitty sense of humor and bad singing voice. I also dislike that all of them have Y endings to their names or nicknames: Chrissy, Jenny, Marty. Small cast, but you can still get them mixed up. So if you do, don't worry. It's not your fault. It's bad naming.
God, that singing sequence just will not stop happening. I usually don't care too much about characters like this, but when he is the only other male character that we're going to spend any significant time with, there's a couple of other male actors in here, but when this is kind of it, this is a
Yeah.
type of dude who should have a couple of lines here and there in a group of 6 to 7 people in a cast. That would be a more typical slasher film. But again, they wanted to narrow it in, but by narrowing the cast down to such a razor sharp edge of pure necessity, yeah, Marty's got a lot of fucking screen time and dialogue that makes him just so fucking unlikable. And also this brings us to the fact that they went snowmobiling, and the only thing that they seem to pack is a bottle of wine. And and Marty, when they're sitting around the fire and they're done singing and all that nonsense, and Marty actually shows some physical affection towards Jenny by, I mean, laying on her at least while he's talking. At least I'm like, okay, this is an indication that they're at least a couple that I understand.
Mhm.
And he makes the comment, well, if I'd known we were going to be stuck here, I would have brought another bottle. I was like, why wouldn't you bring food? Why wouldn't you, like, if you're going to bring a bottle of wine, bring
Yeah.
some cheese, bring some crackers. You're rich. You like that kind of stuff. Chrissy is going to tell a story that is really weird, but it strikes me. And listen, I'm not in the writer's room. I don't know what the intention is of this story or Chrissy's motivation between telling the story, but she is going to tell a story where she is extremely underaged and basically has sex with a substitute teacher for money. And this was apparently a long time fantasy of hers. And the whole time, the genesis of this story is apropos of nothing. Chrissy's like, what sort of deep, dark secret have you never told anyone before? And then Marty just says, you first. And then she just starts telling this long ass story that nobody reacts to. Nobody, both Jenny and Marty don't really have anything to say. And she's just telling this story. And I could just put myself in the place of this, where we've all known people like this that are chronic oversharers. And she's like, I don't know why I wanted to tell that story. I've never told anyone that story. I'd be like, fuck all the way off, Chrissy. You tell one sip of wine and you are telling people this story. You can't wait to tell people about this story of you having sex with a substitute teacher. I know people just like you. And this is you, you're just like, And then the best part is no one else contributes. No one else tells another. Okay, well, you've told your vulnerable sex story. I guess I'll tell a vulnerable sex story. But it just strikes me as so odd. What did you think about this scene?
It's literally to give Marty a boner. That is the whole point of it. That's the whole I remember being in a group of people where a girl was talking about how she goes pantyless and all the time she was almost caught being pantyless, and it was like I couldn't help but be like, it's really gross. Like you can't control when you're gonna have discharge through the month. It's not only once a month that women need to wear underwear. And she turned red and got really mad because I guess she was trying to give people boners, and that was a boner killer to remind people that women have discharge more than once a month. So, uh, yeah, I wish that a boner killer story would have been told. Maybe Jenny could have piped up about her crazy mommy, because we only hear that in, like, an equally uncomfortable moment. But, yeah, it was really just to give Marty a boner. It also helps that if there are people, which there are, in this building overhearing their conversations, which there is, maybe it would help get her killed first.
Which it does. Um, what the subject of Jenny's mother is something that is so frustratingly dangled in front of our faces and never realized. Yet I know about the time Chrissy really wanted to get paid to have sex, and it was like a fantasy of hers. Why do I?
She only made $40. Like, what the hell, man? It's
Well,
less than a half and half in Gastown.
cut rate hooker money, but I guess this was needed for the script. When Marty and Jenny are finally alone, and you would think that they were going to turn in for the evening, but they're definitely not. Oh, I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself because first we need to encounter the Ghostkeeper, the titular Ghostkeeper themselves, and Marty is going to get into a physical fight with an old woman.
I like two things about this dynamic here is like, we've already established that Jenny is a little insecure at the very least, but we don't prey on that. We've also established that Chrissy's a little loose, but we don't prey on that. Instead of having either of these women bump into the old woman in the hotel and be called crazy or be making stuff up because she's maybe made up the story about the substitute teacher or is maybe crazy because she's aloof, we have Marty, Lothario himself, bump into, get in a fight with, and then scramble away from, like he's afraid of losing this fight with the old woman. So I really like that, they have this man encounter the other who is fully realized. It's not like he thinks he saw someone. It's not like he gets attacked and says it was an old woman to sort of save face or something. And it's not the women that encounter this. I really like the way they position that. It also strikes me that maybe they've never seen a slasher film before, or else they might have gone the other directions with these. But the old woman, quote unquote, is 55 years old.
Yeah, I know. It's
When I hear old woman, I want like an 80-year-old decrepit, I want a 90-year-old hag. A hag.
well, this was the late 70s and early 80s, and and any woman over 30 is already
A old woman.
it's already past her prime as far as they're concerned. But in this case, yeah, it is funny that at 55, and I think they go out of their way to make sure she is as hunched and wild as humanly possible. This woman is not very interested in answering any of their questions. And they have a lot of them, like, who are you? What are you doing here?
Yeah.
And
Do you work
do
here?
you work here? And she just kind of mows down on the biggest sandwich I've ever seen and will refuse to answer any of their questions except, I suppose, giving them some mountainy, folksy rhetoric instead.
Mountains is made for living. Or, she tosses out these one-liners like, "You're a tough one, Cookie," when it's like she asked you a question, you didn't answer it, she asked you again, and your response is that she's a tough one. Okay, whatever. There's a lot of that too. You will get no answers from this woman, let alone her name. We don't get a name. She is credited as the Ghostkeeper. Uh, okay. We don't understand why until later on in the film, and it's another blink if you'll miss it. There's 2 blink if you'll miss it scenes in this, where this film could make literally no sense if you miss these scenes, and one of them might help understand why she's called the Ghostkeeper. But, yeah. At that point, we don't know her name. We don't really know what she's doing here. We would assume, like they rightfully do, that she's squatting there.
Yeah, because I mean, I suppose the easiest thing for her to say is this place has shut down due to lack of business, which
Mhm.
is what she does tell them eventually. And
Very Bates Motel.
yes, and I mean, the area is completely snowed in. It's believable that
Yeah.
you could even say, like the Overlook Hotel, it's just closed for the winter months because it's just inaccessible. And I'm here as a caretaker. It's so much less suspicious than her just being so cagey, unwilling to answer any questions. And to me, I suppose if you don't have a lot of time to pull the taffy on what exactly is going on here, because you got to get all those Chrissy sex stories out, I suppose this does make a little bit of sense. Although the entire time I felt her character, while very interesting and mysterious, leaned on that far too much and absolutely refused to say anything up until the point in which she finally does say something at almost the very end of the film, which I don't believe personally.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think that it's just a manipulation tactic for whatever reason. But but she decides to offer these people some hospitality and brings them up to the rooms. None of the rooms are locked. All of the rooms still have their original bedding. It's only been 5 years. It's not out of the realm of possibility, although depending on how secure this area is, I'd want to check for critters at this point. But
Mhm.
she offers them a place to sleep. Chrissy is off in her own room, and Jenny and Marty are off in their own room. This is where they have their conversation about Jenny accusing Marty of wanting to have sex with Chrissy, which I mean is so obvious you could see it from space. And so she's right about this. And then Marty explains, well, you live your life and you can live and I'll live my life and you shouldn't even question me about it. It strikes me as an open relationship, but one of those open relationships where it's only one person sleeping around while another person for whatever reason just kind of puts up with it begrudgingly. And I've honestly, when I like, not to comment on people in polyamorous relationships or open relationships or however you want to have it. But I've so much more often encountered people who it just seems to be one person that just kind of does whatever with the idea that the other partner could also do that, but they choose not to. In other words, woefully incompatible people that really shouldn't be together. And this seems like the case. Marty rather shittily just throws in, well, I make a lot of money and you don't seem to mind spending it, as if that has anything to do with anything about what Jenny is talking about. But he seems to think that that is all well and good. And then he says that he's going to leave to go wash up and get ready for bed. And then she accuses him of, you can't even admit when you're going to go have sex with another woman. Which, I mean, I suppose to his credit, he doesn't, but he is just standing in the hallway holding a lantern, which by the way, I love. I love how everyone is just holding these humongous oil lanterns. We have those up at my cottage. We don't use them anymore. They still work, but we don't, they
Mhm.
still even have oil in them and stuff like that. They do work, but this very much reminds me of being up at my cottage with these old oil lanterns that just are so atmospheric and cool. And sometimes they're the only light source. So holy fuck is parts of this movie dark, but not in a, oh my God, what's going on here? Because the characters are well lit. They're just lit by these
Yes.
oil lanterns. And then Chrissy goes to take a bath because it's a horror movie. And that's what you do.
That is what you do. And I do like that. It is sort of like this anti-gaslighting scenario where we don't get jerked around with Chrissy in the bathtub. We don't get jerked around as to what's going on there. We don't get, you know, her mistaking a killer for her lover or her erstwhile lover, lover to be, or whatever Marty wants to be. We don't get jerked around too much with uh Jenny either because she lays it all on the table. Like, yeah, I'm jealous. Yeah, I want to know where you're going. Yeah, I have a good idea where you're going, and you're not going to pull the wool over my eyes. When he says things like, where your dinner dangles or whatever he says about um, him paying the bills and her liking to spend his money, maybe that's another kind of symptom of his affluenza that he has, where he's just going to have this like little harem. He wants to have a little harem of women and toss money around and pour wine down their throats and have his way and do what he wants. Because he's dick. He's a fucking huge dick. But it's another little blink if you'll miss it scene coming up here with the brothers, the two men that are also here alongside this old lady. One of them carries off Chrissy from her bath. And you might, if you, the first time I watched this, I didn't notice this kind of ice hut that they have, this room built of blocks of ice somewhere in this hotel. I didn't notice it the first time until the end of the film where we see it again. And I was like, where was this room of ice blocks all this time? But yeah, Chrissy gets kidnapped from the bathroom, for lack of a better term, the communal bathroom, and everyone starts looking for her for all of 5 whole minutes. They give up pretty quickly with the search for Chrissy, don't they?
Well, yeah. They seem to think that, well, she's around here somewhere, and then around here somewhere eventually turns into, well, she must have gone back to the lodge where everybody else is, where the party was going on, completely neglecting the fact that their snowmobiles don't work. And what are you trying to say? That she trudged out here on foot without telling any of you this? It seems unlikely, but I mean, I suppose they have bigger fish to fry, not least of which Danny, another Y name, is now actively stalking people. But Marty is going to wonder where Chrissy is. It's now daylight. We've seen Chrissy get break down to this basement boiler room like area, but it does have like a fucking igloo. And we see, I suppose, our through fits and starts our Wendigo of sorts. And it's important to note that this version of a Wendigo, there's two things to that we need to talk about, I think is important. One, how the Wendigo looks, which is, let's be real, he looks like a zombie in an Italian movie. Like it looks like
Yeah.
you are it's like the house by the cemetery. It's just a guy. It's a guy in a toque and a jacket, and he's making Chewbacca noises. That's really,
Yeah, a little bit more grunting, no
yeah,
more different than them grunting through the deep snow, but yeah.
precisely. The second thing is when we think of a Wendigo. Now, listener, I want you to think of a Wendigo in your mind, right? Now, what are you picturing right now? What are you probably picturing? Antlers,
They're
right?
probably picturing Gitchy Manitou, really, to be honest, but yeah.
You're thinking of something with a skeletal like deer head or some sort of long fangs, long gnarled fingers ending in claws. As I said, deer antlers. That depiction of the Wendigo is something that is a bit more modern than we might suspect. And some of the earlier I remember being a little kid and my in elementary school, and I had a book of folklore and legends and myths that I used to take out all the time, and one of them was the Wendigo and this idea of you becoming cursed by eating the flesh of humans and then becoming a Wendigo, and then you seek out flesh yourself. And the way in that book that it was depicted, it was a Native American that looked almost skeletal, and he was holding someone's heart and he was reaching out towards the camera. And I loved that image so much that I used to copy the artwork. I used to draw it because I was really
Mhm.
into it. I was really into, if I liked something and if I liked a picture as a kid, I would draw it. I would just copy the art. And I did that all the time. And so consequently, I had a bunch of pictures of these sorts of monsters and things in big stacks in my desk in my bedroom at home. And this was one of those moments. And so the physical appearance of this Wendigo doesn't bother me so much. And they do even go so far as to have the names whispered in the wind. It does beckon Jenny with the wind. But other than that, yeah, you're not really, this isn't Antlers, you know, yeah, like you're not going to get like a really cool depiction of a Wendigo that perhaps you might be suspecting.
And when I was younger, stories of Wendigo, the idea that they would trick people into coming with them into the woods or the forest or the cold and following them so they could eat them. They weren't like a monster that came and like devastated a village. They would lure people away because they looked like someone they knew, because they were someone they knew. That's how the Wendigo like happens. It's not a creature that lives out in the forest. It's infecting someone you know. So it looks like someone you know. So yeah, the depiction of the Wendigo doesn't bother me really in that way because it's so much more in line with the mythological Wendigo, right? There was an island outside of North Bay that was apparently populated by a Wendigo. And when you canoe past it, even to this day, you can hear what sounds like laughing children that were the victims of this Wendigo. But it's actually volcanic uh, little like tunnels, little like rivers underneath the island that the water laps up against over and over, and it sounds sort of like children laughing. It's creepiest thing. But yeah, I don't like what they discover later in a small library scene, which is the second blink if you'll miss it, I think. But yeah, uh, I like the throat slitting because they one brother grabs Chrissy, slits her throat. It's very believable. I like it. And then the other brother, the Wendigo, drags her body into his ice house. I don't know how they constructed this igloo within the house of ice and have a door. So it's almost like they took out walls and replaced them with ice blocks. It's very cool. I wish they would have shown more of that. And that's where I question a little bit of this film. And when I said earlier about people who really had no right making a horror film, they flubbed a lot, I think. And I don't know much about it. And I'm hoping that with the new release from Vinegar Syndrome, maybe there's a little booklet and you can regale us all with what the fuck happened with this movie. Because they have $1 million budget, apparently. I don't know where that budget was used, except for maybe creating this goddamn igloo house or renting all those skidoos.
Yeah, or film stock. Film stock is very expensive, so maybe that had a lot to do with it. $1 million,
Yeah.
though, that's kind of pushing it. I don't know, and particularly, I can't remember if I just mentioned this or not, but I there was more Wendigo stuff that apparently was cut from this film. So,
Which I would have loved to
mm-hmm,
see. Like in
mm-hmm.
Algernon Blackwood's The Wendigo, he doesn't really describe the Wendigo very much, right? So you can get away with having a Wendigo story where you never show a Wendigo in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this would have been one of the very first times that they even tried to put this on film,
Yeah.
right? And again, like pre the notion of antlers, although I do want to point out there is a film, an old trauma movie called Frostbiter and the Wrath of the Wendigo that does depict a Wendigo of sorts. It kind of looks like the creature from The Ritual that was on,
Uh-huh.
but it's got big antlers, just like that creature does. But yeah, that's kind of a weird movie that a lot of people don't really I even think about anymore. But in this sense, now we have daybreak, and Marty is going to very haphazardly spend the majority of his time attempting to attempting to fix their skidoos so they can get out of here. And assuming that Chrissy is going to show up later, Jenny, in the meantime, is going to be spending some time with the old woman that discusses her kids and discusses them being here, but always in the vaguest of terms and always just vaguely talking about Chrissy like she knows her. And this will lead it, or Chrissy, Jenny, excuse me. And her son, Danny, who is another Y name, who is lurking around the property. He's the person that we know was the one that kidnapped Chrissy. And the old woman will just explain their absence by they don't really like visitors. They're not very social.
Which is fully believable, you know? If you've spent time in these sort of lodges or like fly-in fishing areas, there's often a few people that interact with the tourists and a whole bunch of people that fucking don't. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and it tracks. I mean, sure, we saw him drag a person away and kill them, so we know what the motives are there for him, but it could be believable if you're in Jenny's position of sitting there with this woman enjoying a cup of tea. It's weird though, it's annoying to me. I don't know a lot about small engine maintenance or skidoos, but it seems to me that Marty goes out there, sees that the boot is pulled off of the spark plug, and then just yanks the fucking cord out instead of like sticking it back on the spark plug, starting up the machine and going on his merry way. It like in his buffoonery, I think he sabotages it more. Someone who knows much about skidoos watching this would probably have a laugh because I think that's exactly what happened. And he even says later on, like, I don't know what I'm fucking doing. I don't know anything about skidoos.
Yeah, it seems as though that pulling out an entire cable from your skidoo is probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
It really is bizarre, but it also is just an excuse, I suspect, to give him something to do to separate Jenny, who, by the way, is gonna get roofied by lack of,
She does.
yeah.
I mean, you shouldn't accept tea from fairies, my God. Um, I do like that when she wakes up, because that all happens pretty quickly. We have a little tiny tea time and we have a little tiny library scene. So she doesn't seem to be too alarmed that she's being roofied, but she picks up a newspaper about a small little fucking Holocaust that had gone on. I guess there were some people found dead in the area. A little massacre had happened.
People dismembered
And
and they think it's a bear.
yeah, and a book on, you know, folklore of Canada, I guess, and talks about the female keeper of the giant man-eating beast. And this is where I have like a little problem with their Wendigo story because it is completely made up. I've never ever heard in my time, and not like I am a lore keeper of any like in any way, shape, or form, or know many indigenous stories other than my like in passing knowledge of Nanabush, for crying out loud. But there are not female keepers of Wendigo. They've made that up 100% from what I know.
The other weird thing about this Canadian folklore, if this was a real book, I would love to get my hands on a copy of the same type of book that was used in it. But the thing that I find extremely odd is not only is there no, it's just not true, old women, or more typically women, taking place or taking care of these Wendigo. It also bothers me that they don't even refer to them as Wendigo in the book. They refer to them as giant cannibals. And I suppose a cannibal giants is what they
They did
refer to
grow
them.
in size as they ate.
True.
They don't mention that it is indigenous folklore, and they only mention the Wendigo by name in the title card, which I love. But
Me too. But I just think it's odd that the book doesn't corroborate that. Why would you pick that page? Why not just
Mhm.
get if you want it to be a Wendigo story and you name drop Wendigo, they
Yeah,
spell it with an I. I've always known it to be spelt with an E, but whatever. This is not an
depends on what end of Canada you're on.
true.
It's spelt different, and in the US too. So it's spelt
Yes,
different a couple ways. Same with Nanabush.
true,
Nanabush is spelt different in lots of places.
true. Yeah,
Get You Manitou spelt different. Yeah.
this is not exactly an English word, anyways. So it's spelled
Mhm.
however they need it to. The um it just doesn't make a lot of sense, and there's not a lot of consistency. You couldn't have had a typist type up a fucking page that just said Wendigo, since you bothered to put that at the beginning of your movie in the first place. Again, it's probably one of those things where the title sequence came later, and I'm curious if it was something that they had filmed hearing tale of this folklore that had existed, like by their like vague knowledge of like Native American culture. But then by the time the film was almost done, they were able to put a name to it. Oh, Wendigo, that's what they're called. You know what? We'll put it in the title card. So it seems a little bit more like we knew what we were talking about, as opposed to just referring to it as a giant cannibal. But this does lead into one of my favorite sequences in this entire film, Danny with a chainsaw. Because after Jenny wakes up, she is going to wake up and be immediately attacked by this man wielding this device.
Which is wild, because it is like scene missing. Danny has a chainsaw, and there's a chase through the hall, the darkened and sort of like cockeyed corridors of this now very scary and ominous abandoned hotel. It's the first time that it seems scary and ominous, and I think it's probably because of a little bit of like skewed daylight, and it's like either super dark or super bright, because that's your choices in the day in an abandoned hotel. You don't have that warm, oil lamp kind of thing. You don't have the cozy fires flickering in the background. All that coziness is gone, and it's pretty stark. I really wish that this had been drawn out a little more. I really wish that we had a little more of this chase, or maybe the Wendigo himself could have been involved in this chase instead of just his henchman brother. But it ends fairly abruptly.
You can,
with the only other bit of gore.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenny is not a person with whom you fuck with. And she is going to get this guy to fall on an iron railing and get impaled. And one of the things that I love about this and thinking about this film is that I try to imagine, how many times has Danny done this? How many times have they, through happenstance, captured people, killed them, and fed them to their Wendigo brother, who became a Wendigo somehow? And then for it to all end like this, as it inevitably should eventually end like this. But I wonder if in those moments while he was dying on that railing, he thought, of all the people, this random fucking girl was the one to do it. Finally, kill me. The reaction of Marty is very interesting. And I think that it's actually pretty in keeping with the character, because it's almost as if he, before the possession of sorts that we could call it, as he is overtaken by, I don't know, the magic of the mountains, I would think that he was trying to get away from her because she killed this man. And even though she did it in self-defense, even though it was justified, the only thing that Marty can think of doing is probably how this is going to ruin his life. He doesn't want any part of this. And he immediately starts getting away from her. But the conversation becomes quite garbled as he puts symbols on his face with grease in the shed and starts talking nonsense.
He has reached his breaking point, which wasn't very far for him, I guess. It's just too much for his little affluent wine drinking brain to comprehend, perhaps. Or, which I wish that the book on Canadian folklore that fucking Jenny had been reading would have gotten into this, that it is the isolation and the cold and the hunger that invites the spirit of the Wendigo into you. And he's opened himself up to that by eating no fucking food, by being in the desolate cold, by worrying that he's trapped there. All of those things are what has invited this. So maybe if this was a Wendigo story, it would have been clear that he was becoming possessed by that particular spirit and was at risk of cannibalizing maybe Jenny herself. or joining the Wendigo in his little indoor igloo or whatever. So I wish that they would have developed this a little further, and maybe they did at one point in the script. It is odd, but we have already established that it's a complete departure from typical Wendigo stories that are passed down in Indigenous culture. They did have a script supervisor, which turns out to be the director's brother. So I don't really know if there was any First Nations input into this story, and I highly doubt there was any. Although living in Banff, and Banff in that area has a huge reservation around it. There's a lot of unceded territory that they were squatting on, like most of us white people do. And there would have been a lot of tradition passed down, even amongst different colored people, us white folk. So I'm sure they're aware of where it deviated, but it's odd that they didn't like kind of reinforce that, because most people watching this horror movie would have no idea what a Wendigo really was, right?
Yes, you're very correct about that. So I guess look, thinking about it, I wonder if with their exposure to the culture, maybe it was kind of a detriment that they were exposed. Like, you know what they say, like a little knowledge is a dangerous thing,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they were probably just thinking, oh, well, this is fine. And this is more of an inspiration as opposed to really trying to pay proper homage to this legend and belief. And so I think that they had a vague idea of it that they thought was probably more concrete than it was. And then as the story progressed in their script writing process and while filming, the story molds to fit the needs of the practicality of the shoot itself.
Hmm.
So then you kind of end up with this version, which, I mean, it's more impressionistic. If you're interested in Wendigo culture, I
Hmm.
mean, especially nowadays, this is so much more common knowledge.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
just comes off. It
absolutely.
just comes off as trying to remember a story you can barely remember, and then just putting it into a movie and being, that's good enough. We want the story to be an isolationist story with a small cast with people getting killed, and this is as good a reason as any to do things. And we have more stuff with the Wendigo, that particular character, but we ran out of money. So because
I don't know what they would have ran out of money on, really, honestly. Like
your
you
guess,
mentioned film stock, which I totally forgot about. That it cost a shit ton. It's not like shooting on digital where like me and my dog could go make a fucking really good movie. If you've not seen Good Boy, I highly recommend it. It's actually very good. But those micro budget things just weren't a reality back then unless you were shooting on 16 mil, which is a whole different world, right? So yeah, it's I don't know what they would have spent their budget on otherwise, except for drinking at the adjoining hotel that was open, that they were probably staying at, and probably living large because that's what people did in Banff and at that time.
it's really hard to say, but the old woman is going to put an end to their skidoo shenanigans. No one's getting out of here. She's not going to pull the cable. She is going to set the whole thing on fire, and she is going to say it'll all make sense in time. You'll see, Jenny, it's all going to be okay. This woman is very preoccupied with Jenny, and Marty is going to do what they love to do in this film, trudge through very deep snow while Jenny
Oh, yeah.
just calls out after him, where are you going? And he is going to just leave and enter the wilderness. And Jenny is going to be left alone now, truly facing up against this person, because Jenny says that when Marty keeps talking about the fact that, covered in grease, that he has put symbols on his face, and he has said that all of his education and reading books with big words, he can't actually fix anything. And so he finds himself at the mercy of this place, just as anyone else, a commoner, I suppose. He even throws out a line about he doesn't understand. He couldn't defend a man who made less than $75,000 a year, and as in 1981, that's a lot of money. And and so she is like, this doesn't matter right now. Who cares that I killed somebody? I know where there's a gun. This is a nice little bit of filmmaking, by the way, where we
Mhm.
see that Jenny stumbles into a closet earlier in the film, sees that there is a rifle with ammunition, and then banks that in her mind for later, that she knows that there is a weapon on the property. Marty just walks into the wilderness. And so Jenny takes it upon herself to go back because she understands that Danny is now dead. There is something in the basement, but this old woman is a fucking problem. This old woman, by the way, who is going to give us a bonus body in the form of the kindly old shopkeeper that has hiked his way up into the wilderness, worrying about these three young people that were kind of rude to him. But he at least Jenny was polite. That's probably what got him to go all the way up there. The one thing that I really like is the road sign behind him, 50 kilometers an hour. It's just very Canadian, and you say, yeah, this is filmed in Canada. Look at that road sign. But he is going to, much like The Shining, enter the building, and get just fucking murdered instantly.
And it's so sad because, when they were in that store, which I had to ask Chris, did you see the store when you were in Banff? Banff has changed quite a lot. It's not quite as homey. It's very touristy, but maybe that little store does exist on some side road off the main drag. Who knows? But yeah, it's not quite as homey back then. But they had been quite rude to him, except Jenny, who showed a little interest, and he reciprocated and is probably used to these rich assholes coming into his store and fucking shit up and being an asshole. So he doesn't hold it against them. He doesn't hold it against them to the point that he goes out there with him. And we've already been sort of like endeared to this man because he throws out that little line of like, oh yeah, the ranger brings them moving pictures up here, Disney pictures. I seen the living desert 3 times. And we're like, aw, you're fucking cute. He's so fucking cute that he goes up there to check on them in his snowshoes, which are super fucking cute. He even parks his snowshoes like you do, with sticking them in the snow outside the door, like a good Canadian boy. There's so much about this lad that is respectful and endearing. And then he walks in the door and gets killed by a knife. Like, it's so sad. It's almost as sad as Dick Halloran, really, honestly. But yeah, of course, Jenny comes in and she sees like there's a body on the floor. We get a few scenes, not enough, in my estimation, of her making her way through this darkened hotel, running away from things. And we get even some crooked through the mirror scenes, but not enough to really drive home the disorientation, the fact that she may be losing her mind to terror or starvation or the drugs she was fed in her tea. Running through this hotel with a gun with dead bodies around her. I mean, it could have been so much more elevated, but perhaps they had not only budget but time constraints, or again, we're just inexperienced in the genre and filmmaking itself.
I think you could probably point to all of the above for everything that you had just said, because that's definitely the impression that I am getting. And it's a shame. It really is. But
Mhm.
there's a part of me that kind of loves the amateurism of this, but it leaves you wanting more, and it makes you wish, with the runtime of this film, it's only uh, it's not even 90 minutes long. It's quite
Yeah,
short.
yeah.
And if I would have welcomed another 10 minutes of cat and mouse stalking scenes. There's so much potential for this space. There's so much potential for this story, or even just dialing in a little bit more on this oppressive presence that they seem to be implying through Marty sort of wandering off into the wilderness, seemingly possessed by something. And then Jenny now hearing this voice of this old woman in her mind, and how Jenny seems to be affected by this place as well. And this is going to lead to a final confrontation between this old woman and Jenny. And this is baffling to me. And to me, this is all psychological warfare. I don't believe anything that this woman says. And the reason why I don't is because this woman is approaching Jenny. Jenny has this rifle fixed on her. The woman tries to tell her that rifle doesn't work. It never did. And so that's a lie. First lie. The second thing that I believe to be a lie that is just total cuckoo bananas is saying that I'm your mother. So the woman says this, and we know that she has been eavesdropping on Jenny and Marty's conversations previously when they were kind of reconciling before they knew that something bad had happened to Chrissy. And Jenny had explained that she doesn't want to be like her mother, that her mother is crazy. Why is her mother crazy? What happened to her mother? We don't really know. I suspect suicide because she keeps repeating in this moment that her mother is dead, and the old woman insists that, no, I'm your mother. It just doesn't, it speaks to me. Jenny knew who her mother was. She encountered her mother. She knew her mother was crazy, and then she also knows that her mother died. So, and then she doesn't want to be, this has been put in very early 80s terms, by the way.
Yeah.
Whether this was truly a mental disorder, whether this was an addiction of sorts, alcohol, drugs, whether this was a mental illness, we literally don't know. It is fluffed away as my mother was crazy and now she's dead and I don't want to be like my mother, in the most basic of terms possible. And
in about as many words, really, honestly, yeah.
Exactly. And this results in the old woman lunging at Jenny, and Jenny putting fucking buckshot into her gut for her trouble, and she dead.
Yeah. And it's a shame in a way because up until this point as well, the older characters have been some of the better actors. Not that anyone's a bad actor in this. It's all actually very good. For first-time actresses, or single-time actresses, one time, I will say we don't get enough of the Wendigo to know if he's a good actor or not. But it was his only picture. So, like, some of the older guys, though, like the guy, the shopkeeper, you know, he has a really good performance. The mom does well, the Ghostkeeper herself, the old lady, we'll call her. Except for here, she's comical. Does not sell the idea that she thinks that she's her mother. Maybe if we would have been convinced by the actress herself that she was her mother, she would have said it with a little more authority and a little bit less crazy yokel kind of look to her face. It might have helped a little bit here. So it's like, not only are we not given enough backstory, the hardest they worked on telling the story of Jenny's crazy mom was at least having a third party fill us in, where Marty has a line far earlier in the film, "You're afraid of flipping out, just like your old lady." And it's cool. It's good storytelling to have someone else fill you in on that backstory in an offhand, crass remark. That's very, very helpful. Stephen King does that a lot. He has bullies fill people in, and he has other people stab back at the bullies with a whole bunch of expository jibes, really. So those expository jibes is what we rely on here. And we can't rely on this actress who, up until this point, gave a pretty solid performance. And now it's just sort of devolved into cartoonishness. It's sort of sad. I like it. I don't believe it, though. And I guess we're supposed to. Or we're supposed to swallow this, right?
That's my impression. But again, this entire encounter starts with a lie. The gun doesn't work, and it never has. Incorrect. The gun works just fine, and it probably always has. So if by that is the first thing you say in this conversation, and then the second thing you say is, I'm actually your mother, you're just trying to fucking get in her head. I don't believe for a second that this is your fucking long lost mother. I just don't.
No,
I
yeah.
wouldn't entertain it for a moment in the moment itself. But even as an outsider watching a story, this is a lie. It's pure. And I would find anyone who thinks that this is legitimate, I would question their intelligence and media literacy. Because to me,
Yeah.
like I would just be like, so what? But you know, the sad thing is Georgie Collins, who played the Ghostkeeper, was the most experienced actor on the set of this. And she had done tons of stage work across Canada and done television. And at the time was the most experienced actor. Jenny Rivas Spear, she was first time actor, but she would go on to have like a really prominent voice career, like voicing a lot of like anime and cartoons and stuff like that. But
Ninja Scroll, for crying out loud.
Ninja
Yeah,
Scroll,
like really good.
one of the greats. And so,
Mhm.
you know, it's cool. It's cool that they would get it. But I kind of agree. Georgie Collins, bless her heart, she was trying, but I think that she kind of got the crazy face where she's like,
Yeah.
I'm crazy. and she just, it just is goofy. Like, I'm sorry, like it's
Yeah.
just goofy. And I actually was so happy when she had died. We've seen this better in a movie called Mountaintop Motel Massacre, where
Which we need to do. Oh my
we need
God.
to do that movie. But that is a movie in which, again, it's an elderly protagonist, mentally unstable, who begins to kill people. There's no supernatural elements to that film, but this is just one of those performances where you're like, this can be done, and it can be compelling, and it can be like sad on top of it. But I just feel like there was not enough time to get better takes, or the actress just wasn't able to deliver the material. But honestly, a lot of it strikes me as inexperienced directors, because
Yeah.
you need to be there for your actors, and you need to pull them aside and say, okay, let's do one more, and we're gonna make you less of a cartoon while you do it. Okay, like we want to, let's come more natural and less cartoony. So Jenny is now the only person on this property, in a sense. She is going to check on her Wendigo ward, and she is like, oh, I'm going to take care of you now. Why? I don't know. And I suppose the implication towards the very end of the film is going to feed us in. But one thing that I do really like is she is going to go out into the wilderness and find Marty's body, stripped of his winter clothes. His jacket is going to be hanging. This is the signs of hypothermia. Before he died, he would have, oh, I'm hot, I'm sweating, because his body is shutting down. And
Yeah.
so he peeled off of it. This is why they find naked people in the wilderness in Canada all the time, because when you're about to die of hypothermia, you feel very hot. And so he has done that, and she talks to him. You should have listened. And then we hear the old woman's voice. You should have been nicer to Jenny, and now you're dead, I guess. And then Jenny returns back to the cabin, sips tea, and it's going to be okay. And I guess Jenny just lives here now.
And my take is that Jenny is now a Wendigo, right? Because that's what has been possessing people here. Whether she's going to take care of her Wendigo brother is what we're supposed to believe, script wise. I'd rather just believe that she is now a Wendigo. And I like the paradoxical undressing. I don't think we get it, though. Maybe if they would have thrown a line in earlier about hypothermia, maybe that would help. We know this because we're from here. We also know this because we've watched films that have to do with it, or follow things like Devil's Pass, or the Dyatlov Pass incident, and
Yes.
know
Yes.
of like historical stories where this has happened. But in 1981, someone watching this as a popcorn flick, it might have been lost on them, and that might have not helped the popularity of this film, because you would get to the end and just be like, yeah, at the end it just sort of falls apart. It does. It helps to know a lot of what they were going for in sort of that impressionistic way. Maybe that's why we give it a pass, and yet again give it a pass, and yet again give it a pass, because we just love what it's trying to do.
You're probably right about that. I'll be honest with you, because the ending itself doesn't really work for me. I don't understand if Jenny is supposed to be possessed by the old woman, if that was the case, if this was always going to be a passing of the torch because she was getting older, the ripe old age of 55, then why did she try to kill Jenny? Why was she trying to get inside of her head and survive, hiding the knife, saying the gun doesn't work? Wouldn't she simply just, I don't know, like kill herself? I just don't have enough information, personally speaking. Secondarily, I'm always just thinking about the logic of this. So Jenny, who isn't from here, who definitely has family and definitely will have people who will go looking for them. 3 people are missing. The shopkeeper's missing. This is the only place in town that they possibly...
It's pretty easy to track people in the snow, I will say.
So I'm just like, and then also, what are you going to do for food? Are you just going to, like, because you're going to have to go into town and get supplies eventually. You can't just, like, that old woman was mowing down on a sandwich. So unless you are a Wendigo and you're just going to start eating the limited bodies that you have, you're going to eat Danny and the old woman and I guess the rest of Chrissy and the shopkeeper. You're just going to eat all of them for now. So like my brain always just gets twisted up in the now what are we supposed to do? And I suppose it's good enough that we just sit back and we have Jenny sipping her tea in this cavernous lodge that she is at the very least going to be spending a good deal of time in, at least until the winter's over, I suppose.
Yeah, and 2 years later when the Lake Louise magnates come up and buy it out from under her and open it back up as a tourist destination, she can't eat everybody.
But I'm really glad that we could do this. And I think that what you were talking about is us giving this film a lot of concessions is because of the fact that it is just so goddamn Canadian. And just, this was exactly what I was in the mood for. Just something that is oh so Canadian, filled with Canadian actors, highlighting the Canadian wilderness and not shying away from the fact that it is Canadian.
And if you are like we are, shoveling out from a big dump of snow, or maybe you have never really experienced that before and you want to see what trudging through waist deep fucking snow is all about for many, many minutes of a horror film, it's on Plex. You can pick up this really cool new version. I want to see this new version quite badly from Vinegar Syndrome. You can probably find it at your library. If you are at a loss and want physical media, you can probably find it at your library through an intra-library loan. They probably have a copy of the old DVD somewhere.
Oh, that would be great. But there's a part of me that kind of hopes that they don't get rid of all that crackling dust that's on all, because it does.
Isn't it cool?
When you said that it was like someone put a filter on there to make it look old, yes, absolutely. You are so dead right about that. But there were certain scenes where it would seem like some kind of weird stock movie that a character was falling asleep to in another horror movie, doesn't it?
It does, and I really like that, like, you can tell quite abruptly at 2 points in the film, but one in particular where, because it's a darker scene and a lot of it is quite dark in the middle of this film, where because we're getting close to the end of the first reel, the picture clears up a lot because that's the least exposed to dust and scratches and people and everything, because by that point it's being run through the machine and it's, it has a lot less wear and tear. The very beginning in that title card, it is so rough looking. Dust and scratches. It's really rough. Even the sound is rough for the first beginning. And then at one point it flips to the second reel and we start all over again with these dust and scratches. Like, we forgot how rough this film is, and I love that. I hope that they keep every single bit of that. And then there's another scene later on, you'll see a cigarette burn when the old lady is looming over a dead body, and abruptly cuts to the next reel, and it's like, oh yeah, here we are, dust and scratches all over again. It's really a testimony to physical media and shooting on film.
So what do we got next for them?
Coming up next, we have another quite Canadian story, and it should be right in time. The film Osgood Perkins' debut as a director, I believe, The Black Coat's Daughter. And that film is so very Canadian. It was originally titled February, and just recently we saw it titled as February, I think on Shudder or Amazon, somewhere like that. They're using both titles out there in the wild, kids, so be on the lookout for Black Coat's Daughter, aka February. And oh man, I love this film. It's going to be a first time watch for Wes, so I am triple excited. And I have to say, Wes, thank you so much for bringing Ghostkeeper to the show, because man, this would have totally flown under my radar. I'm only like 1/10 as attentive as you are with titles or things slipping past me, you know. I'd have never been able to see this. I would have maybe not even noticed that it was being re-released.
Well, honestly, this is a huge thrill for me because I think, like I said in the previous episode or whatever, sometimes I get a little nervous, a little shy to recommend movies to Lydia because I want Lydia to think I'm cool. And because I still always view Lydia as the cool older girl that I want to impress with my horror knowledge. And if I bring something that's stupid, she's going to make fun of me, gang. But it's almost the happiest I ever am in my entire life when Lids is like, oh, this was so good. And then I feel really smart and good until I get scared for the next one. But I'll be a little less scared to recommend another weirdo film because I can't resist it. I gotta know every time that I see a weird title and I don't know it and I suspect it's from the 80s or the 70s or something, I gotta know what it is. My phone is out. I'm looking at Wikipedia's. I'm looking if it's available for me to watch, where I can watch it. And that leads me to some weird and wild stuff. But that causes me to miss a lot of the modern stuff. And Osgood Perkins didn't leave a good taste in my mouth for one of the films that I had seen recently of his. So Lydia told me that I got to get in on this, the ground floor with Perkins, and we got to check out Black Coat's Daughter. And I don't even know what this movie is about. I've only seen images and I haven't looked at anything else. So it looks eerie, it looks cold, it looks quiet, but I don't know. I have literally no idea what the subject of this film is. So I'm very excited to go into it blind.
I'm very excited. So the tables have turned, and I am so hoping that Wes doesn't think I'm a nerd and that he finds this a cool film from his cool friend, not a total loser bomb from his propeller-headed beanie-wearing weirdo.
And on that note, I'm Wes Knipe.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And you've been listening to Dead Air. If you like this show, you can find more episodes and other content on splatterpictures.net, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts. We also upload all episodes to YouTube now, if you'd prefer to listen that way. You can find us across social media like Instagram, X, and TikTok, and the show is edited by Lydia Peever and hosted by Lydia Peever and me, Wes Knipe. We'll see you next time.